welcome back to today's episode of The Brass and the Truth. Today, Redleg and I are going to be talking about the legal system of the military, and kind of follow up on some of what we were talking about last week with the JAG, what it is, what they do. Today, we're going to be talking about cases within the legal system, what the difference in court martials are, command inquiries, and how legal proceedings are different rank by rank, and just our experience in the system itself. Red, anything to add before we get started?
Yeah, and anyone who listened to our episode about Lieutenant Colonel Owen Ray, we're going to be making some references to that. And those of y'all who didn't, I highly recommend y'all listen to that because that will provide a little bit more insight into exactly what we're talking about, into the fair and unfair judgments and decisions that the military has based on ranks. And you'll see exactly what we mean, where sometimes certain ranks will get certain privileges on punishments.
All right, yeah. So today, talking about this, we're going to talk about a lot of cases that are considered a general courts martial or general court martial. And in the military, there are a couple different ways that we can dole out justice or punishments, reprimands, etc. And so we're primarily going to focus on, GCM or General Court Martial, and that's because this is your real in-depth legal proceedings, involves investigation, trial, defense and prosecution, typically some pretrial confinement and other things for major crimes. In another episode, I think we'll do non-judicial punishments, which fall typically under your Article 134. For our listeners, this is all taken out of the Manual for Courts Martials, or the MCM, which provides the articles that military members can be charged with for lesser misconduct, assault, rape, larceny, you name it. It's in there, and there's guidelines on minimum punishments, maximum punishments, etc. And a lot of that 134 are those smaller infractions that get command directed punishment. For general court martials, we're talking your serious murder, sexual assault, and then drug use, because the military classifies drug use at a higher level than minor infractions due to its impact on the mission.
So talking about who's the one that orders the court martial and how it's organized, and then who are the individuals on that tribunal, and then who is on the jury, how that's determined.
So the commander is typically the director for courts martial.
Usually the post commander.
Right, yeah. So court martials are considered the highest level of military justice, and so the post commander can issue that out, or the division, corps, and higher commanders can make that proceeding known. Now, lesser commanders can elevate those things, but typically when it gets to such a level, such as those assault cases, it's kind of taken out of their hands, as it's just immediately taken to that level once it's out of a 134 area. Service members can also request a trial by court martial. This is typically not advisable for most minor infractions, but there are statutes that allow for the individual to request that, especially if they think that they are being unfairly treated. And so those would be summary courts martials. They are quicker, lower level, and different in that sense. For the general court martial, you typically have a magistrate, which is assigned to the post within the JAG system. Now, the magistrates are just judges by another name, right? It's a different term for judges that would adjudicate the case. You have an appointed JAG for the soldier. The soldier can also request additional legal counsel besides their appointed JAG, and then another JAG would be the prosecution. The JAGs are typically captains for some of the lower level infractions and or cases, especially with your minor sexual harassment or assault cases. You get more seasoned captains being the prosecution, and then obviously the service member is involved. When it comes to jury of your peers typically involves a jury of similar rank, but not within your command. So colonels and whatnot that get courts martial will have other colonels or generals from other installations typically get called to serve on their case.
So, yeah, as he mentioned earlier, lower commanders, say like a battalion or brigade commander, can request a court martial. Obviously, it needs to get approved. Usually, a lot of your investigations are started by what's called a commander's inquiry or a CI. Usually, based on the outcome of that CI, determines if it becomes a court martial or if it just stays as a non-court martial procedure. Usually that ends up being like your non-judicial. As Agro said, we'll do like a separate episode because it could be quite in depth. Now we'll probably discuss a little bit of it. For example, they'll appoint an IO or an investigating officer. It really depends on what the crime is that's been committed. Now, like if it's a murder, usually CID, criminal investigative division, will step in that case. But if it's like a football or sexual assault, that's when the IO will step in. Usually, that IO will be an individual from that unit, so the battalion more likely, and depending on who the subject of that investigation was, say a staff sergeant, the IO will be a lieutenant of that battalion. So this is going to be an individual who is not an MP or a member of CID. That individual will have to go to CID or the MPs to get some type of instructions on how to be an IO. They may go into the brigade JAG to get that type of brief training on exactly what to do. Niagara has done that type of training on being an IO. He's actually done that type of stuff. They would have you do what is called a sworn statement, which is this piece of paper. You just kind of write down exactly your side of the story and everything. Think of it like a testimony. Now, funny thing with the Army, they consider this to be evidence. So if it's written on there, it's taken as proof unless someone else comes with evidence to show that that individual lied, and then that sworn statement became considered as forgery or one of the other many types of articles that the UCMJ has out there, which then that puts that person in the spotlight. But yeah, sworn statements are kind of funny in some ways. But I would advise people, those who are about to enter or are interested in entering the military or had just started their military career that's listening, don't think that, oh, those who are in investigation or obviously people who are doing something wrong, there is a very good chance you will be involved in some type of investigation in your career in the military, even if you are one of the clean ones. At some point in your career, because that includes footballs. Just about everyone goes through football at some point in their military, and that itself requires an IO and a sworn statement and so on. So if they put you on that spotlight of a commander's inquiry, don't freak out or whatever. I mean, one of our buddies who was on this show, we can literally, he's like, how many investigations you've been involved in? When I mentioned I've been involved in a couple, and it's like, this is active duty, dude. Like, active duty is completely different. Like, you're gonna probably be involved in at least 2 investigations by the time you make captain, and it's either bad or good. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And another thing is too, someone can easily name drop you in a sworn statement, and boom, you've been flagged. So, and that can,
You
yeah,
gotta
go
explain
ahead.
flags to those members
Yeah,
of
you
the
can
military.
explain that too. You can explain the flags.
Okay. So yeah, as Red Leg's talking about, like investigations are commonplace and should be dealt with quickly. There's regulations on how long they're supposed to last, and
Quote
it
should be quick.
should be quick. Yeah, but they're not always, right? And to his point, they're I think I was appointed an IO. I want to say it was 5 times within 2 years, and assisted with numerous and saw many, many more. And it's again, like you said, it's not something that inherently means that people are guilty. It's just the process of doing it. Individuals that are the subject of said investigation will be flagged, and flags are markers on someone's profile that prevent positive actions on their profile or for their career. And so the negative of being the subject of an investigation is that you can't get in that moment promoted, awarded, typically can't PCS. So there is a encouragement for IOs to move quickly. And sometimes this is a negative thing in that they want to get to a conclusion quickly, and I think that this can sometimes lead to sloppy investigation. But for the most part, it's good for the service member for it to be concluded quickly. I think there's a little bit of pressure on service members to admit to guilt in scenarios where they might not have been guilty, or
Mm-hmm.
sign flippals saying they pay certain amounts of money just to have it over with so they can move on with their career.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, I appreciate a quicker conclusion for the most part rather than limbo for years.
I'll give you all an example from my personal experience. Was that we had a soldier was kind of a troublemaker, always trying to open up an investigation on individuals. They had broken their finger. I'm not going to go into the whole story how they broke it. There were several different stories that they provided on how they broke their finger. They are accusing leaders in the battery that they told them to disclosure to violate the profile, which was not true at all. And they name dropped me in this investigation because I happened to be in the presence in when a sergeant is apparently said to break their profile, and again, this sergeant did not, because I knew the soldier's profile, and even told the soldier to hand the profile to the sergeant to evaluate. Uh, and also the fact that I was in a group chat because we were only a section level unit. So that's how I got named into this investigation. So I got flagged for the investigation simply because of that. So that's how easy you can get into this investigation. Now, even if you're innocent, which I was found innocent, depending on your leadership, they can use it against you. Because, for example, sometimes you get like crazy phone calls in the middle of the day where they're like, "Hey, we need you all to come in to do like simulated like quick reaction." Because of the unit I was at, we're part of the 18th Airborne Corps, so we gotta be ready to go any moment type situation. So they had one of those type of phone calls, and the soldier was freaking out, like, "Hey, like, what am I supposed to do when I got a broken finger or whatever?" I'm like, "I don't know what to tell you. You gonna have to ask another soldier in the barracks to help you out. I don't know what to tell you. I'm not there to help you. You need to ask someone's help. You need to show up because they're asking for everyone to show up." My leadership, apparently after the investigation, was not happy with me saying that specifically. And it's like, there's nothing wrong with what I said, but again, sometimes those investigations can cause that to happen. Even if you're not in the wrong, sometimes your leadership will use that against you.
So I want to go back. One of the things I forgot to mention is there are 3 types of court martial. The one I left out was special. So you've got that summary, special, and general. And special is, I don't want to say abbreviated, but it's a smaller, where no jury typically. There's a judge, maybe a judge, and a few members of a board. And with those, they cover slightly more egregious offenses than the minor ones. To it, the summary court martial can only be enlisted. Officers don't get a summary court martial because typically we're held to a higher standard. So, summary, enlisted, minor infractions, special and general, major infractions. So, if you have a minor infraction by an officer, it's going to be that special, and then a major for anybody is going to be typically that general court martial. Pardon me. To Red Leg's point, there's tons of ways that these things can get started with just somebody being, for lack of a better term, a turd and trying to start things, getting an IO set up to investigate and take things to that action level. And it can go to court martials if the commander forwards the charges, if they think that it's serious enough, or if the individual requests it. But as we get further into this, we want to start talking about cases and dockets that kind of explain the difference in legal proceedings, what we see rank to rank, infraction to infraction, and where there's a little bit of a misnomer on the general court martial and its effectiveness. Redleg, you want to talk about some of the numbers in the past couple fiscal years as far as how many of who were convicted for this or that?
Yeah, so this a reminder for our previous episode on Colonel Owen Ray. We had mentioned about how on Reddit the user our army was talking about how they did some digging on comparison of ranks and court martials and all this other stuff. They did some data work, and we were going to try and verify it. Obviously, it's a lot of work. We kind of did a quick run up on it, but I'll read what data they have. But as a reminder, once again, there's no sources to their data. It's just what they did themselves. But since June 12th, 2023, 12 lieutenant colonels have faced court martial while within retirement eligibility. Three received confirmation, but only one was discharged punitively. Since 2019, two E9s, basically your majors, two O4s, which is your majors, and four E8s, which is your first sergeants, and four warrants were all convicted either at trial or plead guilty via a deal with cases involving DV, non-word discharge. Since fiscal year 21, there have been 380 court martials. This is both special and general. That involve drugs for junior ranks from private to sergeant, and then second lieutenant to captain, and then one officer one. 98.95% saw convictions, and 83% were discharged punitively in that same time frame. Only 11% of retirement eligible individuals convicted or pleaded guilty were discharged punitively. Since fiscal year 21, senior individuals have sergeant and up and major and above convicted or pleading guilty with a 1 to 20 sexual assault charges. 72% who are not retirement eligible receive a punitive discharge. 43% who are retirement eligible do not. Comparatively, the junior ranks are discharged 84% of conviction / guilty plea settings. Only penetrative rape, child sexual misconduct, or CSAM related offenses have a greater than 50% rate of punitive discharge upon conviction / guilty plea. Again, I don't know if they did their sources themselves or someone else from someone else or what. So, but for both ways, this is not shocking at all. If this is true, and now the numbers may be slightly off or whatnot, but anyone who has done time in the military would tell you that this is more likely true, where senior ranking individuals got more beneficial punishments than junior ranking individuals.
Yeah, so with this, we'd really appreciate if, anyone listening in that had experiences like this or witnessed, or without necessarily going out and doxing everybody, because hopefully if they've gone through a court martial, they've gotten their due punishment, and dealt with their issues. But if you notice people who didn't get the punishment they deserve, or want to come on, talk about it, leave comments. We're always looking for more anecdotal stuff from you guys, because at the end of the day, if nobody speaks up, we can sit here and tell you what we've read and what we've heard, and that's great. But more voices means more attention and maybe change.
Of
But through
course,
that,
we want to review. If you have a case in mind, we want to review it.
right, it'll just help us. But two cases that we were looking at not too long ago when we were doing some of the research for these podcasts were a Colonel Wright out of the military academy and Colonel Winograd, and just examples of high-ranking officers that did not receive the due punishment that would come out of their case, and have either victims, or instances where justice wasn't served. Those people still have to deal with that, and or other individuals of the military service receive punishment for similar actions. And it's just, for lack of a better term, unfair. And while life might be, some of these individuals have had multiple charges laid against them at different times and still seem to be in the service or allowed to retire. Colonel Wright had charges levied at him 3 separate times, and 2 times of which, and you can see this on Army Times, for providing alcohol to cadets and making sexual comments while in Hawaii, Alaska, at West Point, to the point that he was removed from having contact with cadets, violated that, and then was still able to retire. And it's one of those things where, if I, as a lieutenant, captain, or major, had served in a position where I had been around cadets, for example, and Red Leg, if you want to speak to this later,
Mhm.
the Gold Bar recruiter or similar jobs. I even had the experience working at Fort Knox, guiding cadets around through training, the summer training, where if I had interacted with a cadet in that way, provided alcohol to them, or had any kind of sexual contact, interaction, or comments towards them, I would have gotten the boot. I would have lost money. I would have been done.
Mhm.
And it doesn't seem to be the case for this colonel.
Yeah, especially in ROTC. I mean, they don't mess around in ROTC. Now, obviously, he is an example that, depending on your rank, you do get a little bit of special privilege, and we had heard rumors of that before in the past. And we know of an individual that had a lot of rumors around him, his name, and that probably should have had a couple of investigations that went nowhere. But anyways, but we know quite a bit of individuals who were involved in ROTC that did have investigations, and they did not hesitate to remove them from the program, or in other places, their programs. So it is quite surprising that it took them so long. I mean, but this is an example of the command being too relaxed with certain individuals because of their ranks.
The case for Lieutenant Colonel Winograd, I believe, was a sexual assault case. And you get statements from counsel like, this individual intends to now proceed with his life. He's happy the Army has applied the appropriate legal standards and seen deficiencies in the case against him. We see this in the civilian world as well, but how much of the deficiencies, because, with multiple allegations, with multiple charges leveled, how often have we seen it where those ranks get such a higher level of fine-tooth comb and attention, whereas a captain in a similar situation, if not a public enough event like Red, like what was the name of the lieutenant colonel that is it Pasquantonio that beat his wife and got 5 or 6 years?
That was Colonel Ray Owen, who got up to 10 years.
Oh, right. Yeah. So Rayo, and then there's another one with Pasquantonio who and
I
this one I
think
haven't.
his case is, I believe he got retirement and everything, but on civilian side, I think he's still dealing with his based on the article that we read.
Yeah.
So
So
I don't
it's one of
think
those
his
like
is taken care of.
so they got it partially right with Colonel Ray because it was so public they couldn't ignore it, right? Standoff with the police, all of that. But then you've got
But there was no
Pasquantonio.
court martial for him. Is the only thing that I would say they got wrong. Is that they just let him submit his retirement packet and they're like, okay, here you go. That is the only thing I'd say that they got wrong. Because if
Right.
it's
So
anybody else, they would have said, no, you're going through the court martial proceedings.
right. Well, and they forced the retirement. Some of these guys they didn't even get to that point. They stayed in service, right? So this is
Yeah,
where it's like, that lieutenant captain major is gonna get dismissed, etc. That E6 and below is getting confinement or losing money. But here we've got four examples of colonels who retired or stayed in position. It's just if you want to start going down the list of some of the docketed cases, we can just compare and contrast punishments for similar crimes.
yeah. So those were the two Army individuals that we grabbed. Now, for anyone who is curious about this, who is going through the court martial proceedings on the Army and the Air Force side, because we got a lot of these from the Air Force. All you need to do is go on JAG, cnet.army.mil, and at the very top, you'll find one of the tabs and it will mention about e-docket. And you click on that, it will show you all the different court proceedings that are currently going on and in the past. For the Air Force, you're looking for legalassistance.logaf.mil, and you'll come upon AL jams, and then from there you'll find public docket, and that will also give you all the current and past court martial proceedings. So these are all public records, and you state at the very bottom that this is all because of FOA. As for the Navy and Marines, we didn't look in to see if they have public records. They should, just on the order. But anyways, the first one that we have from the Air Force is out right. Patterson. This is ongoing at the moment. Is a general court martial for a colonel. This is a full bird, a C. Meeker. He has three articles. Two of them are the same though. Article 90 for a disobey lawful command, and then Article 134 extramarital sexual conduct and fraternization. Now, you'll see fraternization later on. We want to make a comparison to an individual who had fraternization and adultery, and we'll mention what type of punishment that they got is quite surprising what they got. The other colonel that is currently going through court martial proceedings in the Air Force is Lieutenant Colonel J. Hickey, Hobart Field, Florida. And his is Article 112 Alpha, which is a lawful use of Schedule 1, 2, or 3 drug. Now, the way how the Air Force puts it, they don't tell you exactly which one it is. On their docket page, they don't go into a whole lot of detail. They just tell you when it's current, when it started, and then when it's estimated to end, and then who the judge is, the location, and all that. They don't go into a whole lot of details. So we don't know exactly what type of drug use it was, but you'll see a lot of drug cases, and you'll see some inconsistencies regarding the drugs on here. The very last one that we'll mention that's ongoing in the Air Force is a Chief Master Sergeant S. Devin out of Maxwell, Alabama. And his is all Article 120, and then there's Article 120 Bravo. 3 counts of sexual assault, and then sexual assault of a child. Now, there's a bunch of other cases, but to summarize some of the other ones that are ongoing, you have 14 airmen first classes, you got 4 captains, 6 master sergeants, and then uh, 15 staff sergeants that are going through their court martials as well. Variety different ones, some pretty crazy ones, some of them quite minor. Obviously, since they're ongoing, you don't know what the outcome is. But because it's so vague, we don't know exactly what recommendations that they're receiving. So it's kind of hard for us to compare it to past cases like the ones that we have mentioned already to say, is it justifiable recommendation to say, okay, Lieutenant Colonel Owen Ray received this type of punishment, so why is this airman receiving this type of punishment then? So you had to wait till after those cases are closed to kind of make that comparison.
Yeah, and I'll put in a little devil's advocate with the numbers that we looked at so far on Docket and the Air Force docket, and if anyone's got info on Navy, Marines, for whatever reason, we're just generally unfamiliar with their websites. It may be locked behind the access cards, but generally, out of these two, I will say noted there are fewer colonels and lieutenant colonels in the military than there are enlisted folks. By pure numbers sake, someone might argue, well, of course there's less investigations because there's less of them. And like, while that is a fair point,
Mm-hmm.
when you get into just human nature, human activity, and the fact that we know from experience that people don't just change when they get into these higher ranks. You'll notice a trend of differences, not just with the larger number of enlisted and lower ranking officers being charged, but with what they're being charged. I think, and Red Leg, correct me if I'm wrong, I didn't see a single DUI charge for a lieutenant colonel, or sergeant major listed on the dockets. As I'm going through it again now, I'm seeing them for like staff sergeant and below.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to the enlisted side, so I can't say it's not happening on their side. But if you're seeing them, uh, I'm not surprised. And it does kind of raise suspicions on why you're not seeing it on the officer side. And yes, someone's going to play that one card of like, well, there's less of them, so it's going to happen less. And I want to point this out because everyone wants to try to say about how Secretary Hesketh is an alcoholic because random people, anonymous people claim that he is. I'll say, please try to say it before to me an officer that is a desk jockey like he was a major because once you make it to major you pretty much just a desk jockey who doesn't have a bottle in their desk just by almost everybody in the military drinks a little bit. uh Trust me, there's going to be some officers that either has committed DUI and somehow they managed to get away with it. I know a lieutenant when I was in, they got arrested by the local police for DUI and he got away with it. And they sent him to Romania still
Mhm.
because the division commander pulled some strings with the local authorities to basically get him out of it so he could still go to Romania. They would not have done that for some private or some staff sergeant. They just will not. So none of this whole stuff with Secretary Hesketh and being alcoholic, officers do. They do drink just as much as the enlisted side, if not maybe more. They're a little bit more discreet about it. But yeah, they somehow do sweep the stuff under the rug for plenty of officers. And as Agro had mentioned in the previous episode, he knew a colonel who got DUI at his unit. So
Yeah, and that colonel literally did not go through the same proceedings as me. And someone might be like, "Oh, well, how would you know?" I was the liaison for my unit, the XO. I saw everything across my commander's desk, and I sat in on the police investigation in Korea, intimate knowledge of the case, and even spoke with the colonel after he wrote me the recommendation to help with my case. But in that same year, I actually had a sergeant major in the unit with the same thing. DUI, nothing happened. And I stepped out the door as XO before I got to liaise for him at the actual police station, but continue to have intimate talks with him and the other sergeants major at, within the unit. It's just those things where like I intimately saw two high-ranking enlisted and officer go through the same thing I did and be treated differently. And it's just I get it. There's levels of readiness that have to be maintained. That colonel was in a position on general staff to have a major effect on everything, read into multiple things to that level, and I can understand that. But as I'm going down this list now of cases, Air Force is honestly maybe a little bit more user friendly of a website. But one thing that is honestly shocking is, and this is an aside, this has nothing to do, is the number of child pornography and child abuse in here is just heartbreaking.
Yeah, yeah, I told you there was a lot. It's mostly on the enlisted side, but
Yeah.
yeah,
And that may eventually pop up in another episode. But other than that, there's a lot of failure to obey
lawful
lawful
orders.
orders, and that
With
is a
still very vague. That
oh yeah,
we'll probably explain it sometime in the future. Who knows when that be? But
right. And then you've
that
got dereliction of duty. So between those two, right, those are
that is
things
still
that are
also
very
very vague.
vague and subjective.
Yeah,
But what was the case where they got 3 months of confinement, or 20 days?
you have that copy paste. But I
Yeah,
want to point out the military is a numbers game. So like that lieutenant I know, they needed officers to go to Romania. So that's the only reason why he was able to get away with it because of that. Colonels are hard to replace. So that's probably why the colonel that Agro knows is because they needed to keep him. Because who are they going to replace him with? They're harder to develop. When it comes to lieutenants and privates and even sergeants, the Army, the Air Force, and all of them is like, yeah, we can produce another one next year. No big deal. So everything is a numbers game in the military. So that's probably why they find it so much easier to get rid of them, even though it still costs millions of dollars to spend to have soldiers go through basic and to send cadets to ROTC and West Point.
numbers game always. I mean, I'm gonna be one of the first advocates for the mission, the force, and sustaining the fight. When it comes down to it, brass tacks, I lean on the side of if it's not, one of the egregious, if it's not child porn, if it's not rape, if it's not murder, like heaven forbid, larceny, dereliction, some of those things, always case by case. If it's not major, keeping them in may be better for the service. You can reform people to some degree. Sometimes it comes down to a matter of we need people to do the work. And wartime, go with some corporal punishment, let the unit take care of it, sock party if you have to, but like there's a certain point where the numbers game is going to be important. But we're in peacetime, and these examples are sometimes hilarious. U.S. versus Second Lieutenant Dodd, wrongful use of Schedule 1, 2, or 3 drugs, confinement 20 days. No forfeiture of pay, but confinement is a absolutely wild sentence.
Especially
That
when we don't know which type of scheduled drug it is. And as you mentioned before we recorded, explain what Schedule 3 drug could be in the military.
Yeah, so schedule 1, 2, and 3 followed the same civilian schedule, with like Schedule 1 being cocaine, heroin, or whatever. Schedule 3 is going to be more of those prescription type drugs that aren't expected to be abused but can be. And so I imagine that this lieutenant was abusing, I don't know, Xanax, um, or something. The speculation, obviously, don't know exactly what they did, but to the degree that it became a problem that the command noticed and called them out on, didn't kick them out. And there's probably some underlying problems. This may have been some wake up call for the lieutenant by the command. Not sure. But like compare that, right, to where's the other scheduled drug?
Well, to play devil's advocate with it, though, if it's a prescription drug, who determines that he was abusing it? The command himself or the doctor that is assigned to the unit? In this case, the
Okay.
squadron.
So I mean, this could be all three ways, right? So
Yeah.
if let's put it this way, the most likely case in this scenario is they abused their prescription or some kind of low class drug and missed movement, right? They didn't show up on time or they were asleep at the staff duty desk or something of that nature, which should have gotten
Yeah.
them a derelict of duty, possibly. But to say that it affected their duty in some way that the command had to notice and at that point could get supporting documents from the doctor. Now, if this could also go the other way, and I think is a little less likely. They used their prescription or used some kind of drug, and a medical professional noticed it, reported it, and then the command took action. I would be willing to lean on the side of if they got confinement, that this person needed the wake up call and treatment for a abuse problem.
That is all based on the punishment that lieutenant received. I do want to point out that for those who are not experienced with the military, your commander makes the final decision on your anything medical. So even if your doctor says you should get sick leave or whatever, that is more a recommendation than anything. The commander makes the final decision on that, not the doctor. So I just want to point that out. That's kind of why I mentioned the commander. Was it the commander that says, "Oh, he's high on his prescription drugs," or was it actually the doctor who went to the commander and said, "Hey, I just want you to know, based on the symptoms I'm seeing, it looks like Lieutenant So and So is abusing his drugs, and that there should be actions taken."
Right, and so to clarify, not all medical decisions are by the commander, right? It's just those ones that would affect duty and
A lot
status,
of
and that,
times they want to act like they do, though.
yeah, commanders think they lord over a lot of those things, and they do own a lot of the signature authority, for surgery or a prescription that'll affect work or cause a light duty status, because at that point you're affecting the work, right? Let's say somebody did have to take Xanax for anxiety or something that's going to affect work. The doctor has to get the command's approval to prescribe that because it's going to affect whether or not that soldier, airman, officer, etc., can do their job. And so there's some command approval in that. Most often, commanders are just like, "Yep, sign, whip, whip, whip," um, because they know that for the most part, it's not really in their hands. They just, I think some of them get a little power trip when it comes to some of that.
We definitely know all you gotta do is follow under the WTF moments, and you'll see a lot of it. Sometime in the future, we'll go over some of those. But to give an example, another example of drug usage is First Lieutenant Payton, who did a guilty plea for failed to obey order or regulation and then wrongful use of Schedule 1, 2, or 3. He or she was discharged, got DIS, which is a dismissal. This is only for officers, with a forfeiture of $1,000 for 2 months and a reprimand. So here we got 2 months, and then another individual who got dismissed with $2,000 in total forfeit and then a reprimand. Now, again, we don't know exactly which scheduled drug each individual used, so depending on the scheduled drug makes a fact determining punishment.
And another funny thing about this is while that 112 covers the three different types of drugs, we can also look at the fact that this pulls in Article 92, failure to obey an order or regulation. It's what's the sad thing is that most likely that's just tacked on there because they had to say, "Yep, we told them they shouldn't do drugs," and it's
Yeah.
just it's a funny look at whether or not the article should have subparts that are specific to Schedule 1, 2, and 3. And again, for those of you that are curious, MCM, Manual for Courts Martial, will cover the minimum and maximum punishment here. But this just shows how different the punishments can be, and that some drug abuse is, in the case of Lieutenant Dodd, tolerated because he didn't get dismissed. I'd like to transition to the difference between Captain Clifford, who has aggravated assault with a dangerous weapon,
Yeah, this
or
one.
assault consummated by battery, assault with a firearm, child endangerment, and endangering human life with a firearm discharge, confinement for 16 months and a discharge. This,
Dismissal.
or yeah, dismissal. This kind of resonates
Yeah.
with Colonel Ray in that there's a firearm involved. There was assault. There was assault consummated by battery
And
and
children.
and children. And here we have a guy getting dismissed, fined. For sure, Lautenberg can't serve again. You know, and that was
2017.
2017. But the colonel did not get the same punishment at all
On the military
on
side,
the
so
military side. Yeah,
obviously on the civilian side, he got a much worse punishment. But yes, on the military side, he basically got a favorable. I mean, he's ain't a punishment on the military side. He got a reward.
but there's 16 months of confinement there. Now this
It's
where
probably dishonorable, maybe dishonorable or other than
if it's a
honorable.
dismissal, it's automatically dishonorable. It's yeah, you don't really get.
I don't know. I had never met anybody who got dismissal on the officer side, so I don't know exactly what type of discharge that is.
Yeah. Now compare this 16 months of confinement, which really is pretty light considering that he had
Yeah,
3 Article 128s.
and then
But you
two
compare that
134s
to down below, we have a sexual assault that had dismissal and confinement for 6 months.
with forfeit of $1,000 for 6 months and a reprimand.
So
That was
six
done by
months
a
is,
major.
oh yeah, like you only get 10 months more for using a gun and not being sexual. That's wild to me. Now, sexual assault can come in various forms.
Mhm.
Obviously, you can have the low end be um, that line between harassment and assault. And in a later episode, we'll go through, at least for the Army, SHARP and what that program is, how it defines harassment, assault, and kind of differentiates the line between. To get an Article 120 and only 6 months of confinement versus a 128 and 16, these are both lower than I would expect for punishments, but more than just getting to retire or not getting uh, charged at all in the case of the West Point colonel, and that's just crazy different.
That right below that one is the one I mentioned earlier that I wanted to bring up. So we talk about the individual who got the fraternization. Well, this major back in 2018 got disobeyed lawful command, adultery, and fraternization. Not only did he get a reprimand and dismissal, but he got 3 months in confinement for committing adultery and fraternization. Now, who knows? Maybe they're trying to say it's because of disobeying a lawful order. Now, I mean, you don't see that happening unless it's in combat. So this says it happened at McGuire Dix Lakehurst out in New Jersey. So uh, obviously, it's not war related. I'm going to assume based on the location. But as everyone knows, adultery and fraternization are not criminal on the civilian side. You can't be prosecuted for it. But in the military, you could be prosecuted for it. And he just got put in confinement for 3 months for it. Well, now where's the
Dismissal,
justification for that?
dismissal for adultery and fraternization is also kind of wild in
Yes,
the like.
but apparently that is becoming the thing in recent years. I've been seeing that a lot. We mentioned in the last episode or two that some officers were getting kicked out for it. but I was told while I was in that not just my division commander, but a lot of commanders in the military, if you're an officer committing them, they're going to give you the boot. For some reason, that is becoming a thing now. But as you were saying,
I mean, we do want our officers to be above reproach, higher standard and everything, but just in general, it kind of blows my mind that we could take that and put somebody in confinement for 3 months for that. I understand
mm-mm.
it if you're going to go to the lengths of dismissal, fine, but to put somebody in jail for adultery, we're not the clergy. As a strong Christian myself, I consider myself strong in my faith. I detest the idea that anybody would sleep with someone else's wife, but that's something that, that's between you and God, you and the other spouse, and honestly, lucky the guy didn't get shot.
I mean, we've heard plenty of stories where that has happened too. So
In the military, there's actually a large swing community of or swingers.
yeah,
So
but
I mean,
a
I'll
lot
be
of
honest,
like
there's a lot of
Gabriel's
really
Garrison Commanders
consensual.
was into that.
Yeah. So not supporting it, not saying it's okay, not at all, but there's just I've met so many people who are very open in the military and I'm just like, are we going to punish them for willingly going outside the confines of marriage? I'd like to in general, but it just there's odd lines that I don't think are determined.
And we spent a whole episode talking about fraternization, and yes, it is in the UCMJ and all that stuff. But we didn't talk about adultery. That is obviously in UCMJ, as we just mentioned. And I do know when I mentioned to people on the civilian side, these are UCMJ. Like, you can get punished for it, you can get kicked out. They're surprised by it because you just don't expect it. Should we be kicking people out for it no matter what their rank is? I honestly do not think we should because of the fact that you cannot be prosecuted for it on the civilian side. So if you can't be prosecuted for it on the civilian side, why are we doing it on the military side? I just think it's a waste of taxpayer dollars. We're just getting rid of individuals that we need for something like this. But I want to mention this. You mentioned it while we were in about adultery being part of UCMJ at a time I did not know. When I looked it up, the maximum punishment is 1 year in confinement. Yes, in UCMJ, you can get confinement in Leavenworth for a whole year for committing adultery, which is absolutely insane.
Well, and most likely you'd be in a regional facility, but the point stands.
Yeah.
It's that level of wow.
Yes.
We could really throw the book at somebody for it. And okay, again, from a Christian aspect, I detest the idea, but it's one of those. Is it for the good order and discipline? To wit and devil's advocate, adultery is actually listed as one of the justifiable provocations for manslaughter. Basically, the UCMJ and MCM recognize that if you catch your spouse cheating on you, that's a reasonable provocation to levels of passion that everyone understands. I see why you killed a person and it's manslaughter and not murder, but it's like it's still that's not guaranteed. We're talking about for the good of the force. Did Major Dunlap cause such a problem that he needed to be confined for 3 months and dismissed? Was the money that we spent on her? I actually don't know the
Yeah.
gender.
They
Um,
don't say.
did the money we spent on their training, their security clearance, their travel in the military. Did we waste all of that for what could have possibly been a one night stand, a long term thing in an unhappy marriage where they were gonna divorce anyway? Like if you
Mhm.
take the military lens to it, was it worth it?
Yes, and I think that's something that's part of the reason why we're doing this, especially this series of episodes, is to highlight this, to show you all, especially those who are not involved in the military, to show this is part of what your taxpayer dollars are going towards. So you can hopefully tell your congressman or to say, can we stop wasting our taxpayer dollars on this stuff and start spending on people who actually should be going to confinement? Just like I knew someone from my battalion who it took them several years who committed some heinous crimes to finally send him to Leavenworth. He was under investigation long before I showed up to the battalion, and it took a couple years after I showed up for him to finally go there in handcuffs. Uh, it's not like he committed murder, but it was sexual assault and all this other stuff, and it involved kids. These are the individuals that we should be spending our time and energy on, not someone like this who committed adultery and fraternization. And anyways, how does that even lead to court martial to begin with? I understand they're probably going to say, "Oh, it's because it's rank," but I mean that should have been a non-judicial punishment to begin with, no matter
100%.
the rank.
This came probably from a Article 90. My thought on this one is the most likely case is this was a long term, and seeing this from a military police aspect. So we can do MPOs or military protective orders, which are basically just restraining orders.
Mm-hmm.
If you do an MPO because of or whatever, right? Say this major slept with some dude's wife or some chick or whatever, right? Slept with somebody outside his marriage and then got an MPO to not contact them anymore. So there could have been a 134 NJP beforehand. And this is where we're going in this blind. We don't, like devil's advocate, we don't know what happened before. If there was an MPO and he or she continued to engage in that relationship, they could have had that Article 90 disobey lawful command of breaking the MPO. And then they were like, all right, we're going to tack on adultery fraternization. But again, it goes to that point of, did you really need an MPO for adultery? This should have been something on the civilian side. And then like take that to that level or add more to this, because Article 90 is definitely not the only thing he could have been charged for. Because if that were the case, there'd be a conduct unbecoming of an officer, indecent conduct, and a number of other things that should have been tacked on this one to get to the point of dismissal.
I want to mention on the MPO, try and help clarify on that one, is that it is like restraining order, but the difference is it does have an expiration date unless you violate it. I think it is, was it 6 months? It's the expiration date? Yeah, so as long as you don't violate that, it'll expire. What they would try to say is, oh, if you don't violate it, it will help your case. Now, that doesn't always mean everything. The Army, particularly, I don't know about the other branches, they always try to say that stuff. This stuff will help you in your case, but doesn't really matter to them. Doesn't care. They don't care. For some reason, they care more about what's on paper than what they see with their own eyes. But I just want to clarify on that. Don't think of it like an actual restraining order where it's indefinite. Unless the individual requests it to be dropped. There is the expiration date on it. I think you had to violate it for it to become indefinite or something like that. I forgot how you make it permanent.
It takes so much. It's an injunction, and that goes so much further than I'd be willing to get into today.
I think that's CID stuff that gets involved in that, I believe.
Well, there's civilian, and to the point that again, it would just involve more than just these 3 articles listed for dismissal.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to know more about this one, because it just, when I saw that, I was like, confinement for 3 months and dismissal for that's
Yeah.
wow. That's, I mean, keep it in your pants, man or woman.
There are plenty of others. I mean, quickly going over the couple other ones that we have. Lieutenant Colonel Daniels, he had dereliction of duty, rape. He was discharged. He got dismissal, and he got confinement for 3 years with a reprimand. So I would say that's a justifiable one. Now, you probably could have gave him a longer sentence than that. And then you got Second Lieutenant Colbreth. His is interesting. So you got 2 counts of indecent viewing, recording, and broadcasting. Then you got conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman, and then indecent conduct. He or she got discharged with dismissal and confinement for 26 months. Now, it's really curious what this broadcasting and viewing, it almost sounds like OnlyFans or something, but still wondering how that warrants 26 months. I'm just going to take it as the individual recorded themselves and sent it to individuals or individual. That's where I would say it requires more information. Now, very last one is a Colonel Jones. This one I would say should have been longer. He or she was found with possession of child pornography, and all they got was 12 months in confinement with a dismissal and discharge. Only 12 months for child pornography. People on the civilian side get far longer sentence than that.
Right. This is one where, personal opinion, I wish the military allowed for castration because well, okay, look, I'm just gonna say it. Child pornography should not be an Article 134. It should be a 120 Delta. We should add it to the sexual harassment, assault, and rape section of
Yeah,
the UCMJ. It
it
should
makes no
be
sense
beyond
that.
unexcusable. Like, it just, the fact that you could potentially do NJP for child pornography drives me up a absolute wall. And this is one where it's like, hey, the military legal system's not perfect, and we've been talking about it all day. But this is probably my most like aggravated take on where the law fails.
You say you were looking at more of the illicit side, and I even was looking at some of the illicit who, and it was surprising how many had child pornography, but they were having longer confinements than that. So, I mean, I'm not going to say exactly how many months because it varied quite a bit, but it was definitely more than 12 months. So, there again, is another example of enlisted individuals who were having more than 12 months. Some of these individuals had 2 years in confinement. Why
And
was a
forfeiture of
criminal?
pay. And
Yes, Bob of them with forfeit of pay. Why were they given a harsher punishment for child pornography when a full bird rank away from a star? I'll let everyone know that a full bird colonel is one way from a star, which is brigadier general. Only a year in prison for child pornography, while airmen first class and sergeants and sergeant first class on the Air Force side, they were getting forfeiture of pay and 2+ years in confinement.
we can probably spend a whole week looking these up, and encourage you, if you're listening to this one, you're like, well, they didn't give enough examples. Just go to the websites that we're gonna drop in the description and that Red Leg had mentioned before. You can see just from the myriad of cases that there have been under trial results.
Mm-hmm.
There's way more of this. After the posts that we had read earlier talking about how punishments were, what was it, like 45 to 50% more um, heavy on the enlisted and lower officer side.
84%.
You can see it.
Yeah, it's just way too many cases on the Air Force side in the Air Force, I mean Army side, for us to really go through it all. That's why we're telling you all to pull it up yourselves when we upload in the description. When you all look in the description and look at it yourselves, because stuff dates back so far back. Like I said, the one that we just read goes all the way back to 2017. Just read the stuff. It's honestly better for you all to see it yourselves than us just doing the data work and giving the percentages like r/army did on Reddit, because then it allows you to see what type of crimes they committed. Because obviously, no offense to r/army, you can easily hide the crimes they committed. They could, some of those individuals on the junior side, which, no offense, a lot of them are going to commit a lot of high crimes. They can be hidden that way. Us seeing you the link allows you to see what they have committed compared to the officer side. Which is not saying the officers don't commit high crimes. There are some. We just read some off to you, but this allows you to visually see yourselves.
I'll tie this back to the beginning. We talked about how court martials. There's the three versions: the summary, special, and general. And these cases are being tried at the general level for these serious, child porn, rape, and so forth. And so that means that these cases involve a jury of peers and a judge ranking above the individual. The judge determines the sentencing. The jury determines whether the sentence is guilty or not, right? And provides that to the judge, and the judge adjudicates on that, just like civilian courts do. And so these judges are doling out these punishments to these ranks, and you can even see. I think you can actually see who the residing judges are on the
Yeah.
website.
Yeah, it's
And I may go back and look and see if certain judges are more lenient here or there. But while every case has its own merits and its own differences, we should really highlight how these are decisions made at these ranks by the one person. This is not blind justice. This is subjective. And while there's a little bit of a place for that, it's clearly biased, and it's clearly allowing for people like Colonel Ray, Colonel Wright, and Winograd to walk out, retire, reap benefits and rewards that other soldiers are not. And so I don't know if the right answer is more punishment for everyone or less punishment for everyone or what. I'll let you, the viewer, listener decide. But it needs to be noted.
yeah.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, is our episode of The Brass and the Truth on the military legal system. As always, if you have any stories, comments, corrections, please leave them in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to, get your take on all of this. Until next time.